Zeke Argeanas. Hello, my name is Zeke Argeanas, and I will be talking about the styles and differences of jewelry that we have from the past until today. Beginning, I would like to point out that these are the necklaces, again, that I have made, and each one has a different style to them. Some are long, some are very short, some are, I would consider, just about the right size. Really, I do make necklaces that have different lengths and different stones and shells. That's kind of the personality I have. I like to add different kinds of materials in them. Now, what I like to talk about is, first of all, this necklace. This is one of my recent pieces that I did, and I call it the necklace of memories. And really, what that necklace is, what I envisioned it, why I created it, was to kind of as a timeline for the accomplishments and the many events, special events that have happened throughout my life. Now, if you were to wear this, this wouldn't be just one long necklace that you would put over. So really, I base this off some of the old necklaces I've seen, as with many of my necklaces that I have created. I base them off from the photos I've seen, as well as live examples that I've seen from museums and such. So this does have an abalone tab, and how you put this on is similar to a strand of pearls. You just wrap it over yourself. I have to take this off. And you strain it out, and you want to make sure that you don't choke yourself, because that's where I keep things busy. And you can obviously change the strands of the strands from 7 strands. This is actually 8 strands altogether, and this is actually how it would have been worn, this kind of style of a necklace. Now, I put what is called a jacoif in Navajo. It means ear string, and this is what we call the pendant, or sometimes we would use those, the women would use those as earrings. So they put one loop on the other earrings, and that's why it's called ear string. And I put the jacoif right here where I folded it over, so I can keep my necklace, the strand of necklaces that I want in place, so when I try and take it off, I won't have a scattered mess. So I can just lift it up and pull it over my head. Now, the next items I like to do is that instead of a shell button, you have this wrapping. And some people refer to this as just wrapping. Some people also like to call it a Pueblo wrap. Now, I've also heard the term squaw wrap, and I don't really like that term as much, so I either like to call it just cotton wrapping, the wrapping necklace. And this is also another old style technique we would use. This that we would take any kind of string or cord. Usually it was cotton, this kind of cotton. This is manufactured cotton, and sometimes you can have a more thicker cotton to wrap your necklaces around. And so you would literally have to pull over your head rather than having a hook and eye clasp for your necklaces. And it was actually really helpful to me, because there's some necklaces that I have lost before that have had the clasp. But since this doesn't have a clasp, it's just really easy to keep on yourself, for just making sure that you don't lose a necklace. This has different kinds of stones and shells, as well as the other necklaces I have. Now, some of this I'm kind of breaking a little bit of the traditional old style necklaces that we used to have. I use, as you can tell, I use a lot of turquoise. I use the big hunk of the stone or shell. Now, as I have shown before in the last video, was the abalone shells that I had, and all of these abundance of materials. Now, in the old days, abalone shell was really hard to come by, as well as some of the other stones, because you didn't have just a whole storage unit just full of your materials. You have to go back out and trade, or literally go out to the place yourself and collect it. So making sure that some of the materials, how they were used wisely, was a big deal back then, so that you wouldn't use all of it. And there was for the stones and shells that I shown before, those only would not have been put in the necklace. Those would have been used for ceremonies and offerings and all that sort of jazz. Now, like I said before, this is called a jacoif, or a jacla, some people like to call it in the English way. This ear string pendant is really long, but it also has that cotton wrapping. And the difference I would like to point out is that the size of the jaguas. Now, a lot of the old pictures of our, Navajo leaders and our, Navajo people, they would not have as big of a jaguar as this, like how long it is. And usually a lot of the old ones that were tied to their necklaces were about this short. And this is all using a technique, as you can tell, the beads are not as like uniformed as like some of these beads. Like these are really uniform, but these are like kind of very like, choppy almost. And the technique I use on this is that I made each bead, I make all my beads by hand, but I made each bead separate. So rather than having a strand of beads and, grinding it down to like the same, size I want, I took one bead and grinded one single bead and went on to the next bead and grinded one single bead. That's another technique that is lost. As for me, I don't really like to use it a lot because it does take a lot of time. So when you have a strand of beads, it makes it more easier to get, a lot more beads like accomplished or completed. As for coral, coral is a very, very special thing in our culture. And coral, I can talk all day about the meaning of coral and just what it means to us in our Navajo culture. But really, what coral it's a rare item that would have came by back in like way in the ancient days. It was really rare, but nowadays you have an abundance of coral, which I try not to use a lot because the coral reefs are dying. But there have been like certain corals that I have been gifted by my family and friends that I use in my pieces. And I try not to go on my way and buy coral because, as for the same reason why, I believe that we shouldn't extract as much coral. So this is a more older coral. This is probably from the 40s. And I was gifted this. And the tradition I was taught was that sometimes there's some Navajo clans out there who are not allowed to wear coral. Like they don't have a belief that coral should not be worn, such as what I've been taught by one of my friends or my relative. He's from Ganado, Arizona, and he said that there's a coral belief out there at the Bitterwater clan in Ganado, Arizona, that they can't wear coral, and it has to do with cause and effect and the consequences that we have to hold such a precious item because it's so sacred. And so not all Navajos can wear coral, but as for me, I'm very fortunate to possess coral and own it, and to own such a very special thing that doesn't move and it stays in place in the ocean, rather with other shells and stones that move about on the ocean. So this is all tab necklace works that I made, rather than this. This is more I don't know what you would call this style, but it has more turquoise speckles in it. And with these are tabs. These are Kingman tabs, and that's Cereus turquoise tabs. And really with our necklaces, our old style necklaces, what I have been taught was that a lot of our old style ones, if you were to make it old style, have to go in odd number of strands. So you have 1 strand, you have 3 strands, you have 7 strands, but for right here, this has 2 strands, which is an even mountain strands. Now, if you wanted to kind of disguise that, you can layer this one with that to make it about 3 strands. So that's what I've been taught, was that our old necklaces, our traditional necklaces, went in odd strands. And again, it has the cotton wrapping again. That's probably the thing I like about jewelry making, is not only making the beads and stringing it together, but finishing it, just to be able to wrap it with the cotton, is putting my signature on it. And this is also my signature right here. This is called a giving bead, and what I do is I take a bead from one of my own necklaces that I have, my personal necklaces, and I attach it to the back of my newly made necklace that will go out, to be someone else's necklace. And that is my signature that I put on the back. It's not really as much as a really common traditional thing that I've seen in old jewelry, but there's some old pieces of jewelry that I've seen from the 1800s that I've noticed it has that signature on the back. I'm not sure if that's what they saw in it, if it was a signature to them or something, but there's also another thing that is kind of relatable to that, which is what we call gift beads, or these sings that we have on our necklaces. And the sings we use when, how I got my sings was that I used for like an accomplishment of a ceremony or an accomplishment of like something else. It's usually through ceremony that I obtain those sing beads, which we attach to our necklaces. And that's something that is always reminds us about the accomplishments that we make and from whatever we did. And it's just a reminder. So with this also has sings, right here. You have some sing beads, and then there's a sing bead right here. Now, don't confuse this with sometimes the old necklaces, they will have like a pendant usually attached to them, like tied onto it, or like two pendants attached to it. Now, that could be a pair of earrings. It can be anything for all I know, but if they're separate from this, then it could also be sings, but people can attach their earrings, like tab earrings, like what I'm wearing, and also attach chocolates to them. If you're not using the earrings, then you usually tie them on the necklace for when they're not in use. And this I based off of a necklace that was worn by Manuelito Chiquito. Don't confuse him with Manuelito, the Navajo leader. Manuelito Chiquito was a Navajo boarding school student in the 1800s, and there's a picture of him that is wearing a similar necklace that I based this necklace off of. Now, I was talking about using so many materials in one necklace. Now, this is kind of breaking traditions because how much turquoise is in here. I was actually trying to go for probably, I don't know, like 1700 style on this, but it's a little more modern because of how smooth and like really like nice looking these necklaces are. Now, you can be nice looking on these, but I wanted to go for a little more rougher side. So I didn't really push it too much on grinding. I left it like a little bit like ungrinded and just sometimes unpolished even. Like I didn't even polish this and it still looks fabulous really. This has 3 strands, again, like I'm talking about the old traditional rule of, odd strands, and it has coral on it, and this is all Kingman turquoise. It has the wrapping, and this is another signature of mine, is this. This is another white clam shell to be precise, bead that I have attached to it, and I have many names, I have been gifted many names from different elders. Now I can't say my actual birth Navajo name due to traditional reasons, but the name I was also given was Hastin Yothgai Tzose, and that means the thin shell man, and that was to also say how much I worked with shells and such, and the thin part just means how I look, I'm a thin person. And for all the shells that I work with, I never, in the past, thought I would be working with this kind of stuff. People nowadays, they really don't I've noticed some people, sometimes they'll make necklaces in this style, where they'll add the wrapping and the traditional, I guess, design to it. But with nowadays, there's a lot more materials available today. We are extracting a lot more from our earth. And creating more materials such as synthetic turquoise, you have black turquoise, and you have all sorts of these faux turquoise, plastic even. But when we extract more, such as coral, I try to be careful not to, because our coral reefs are dying. It's just a whole big mess that we're getting into from extracting a lot. But again, from all these materials that are being extracted, they're being made into things such as beads. So there's manufactured beads out there, such as where they sell at the bead stores, and I can think of Albuquerque, or they can have anywhere where a big town is. I'm pretty sure you're out to find a bead store. So there's manufactured beads that they do make today, and with that makes I guess jewelry making easier, because you don't have to go out of your way to making the beads themselves. Now with me, I kind of don't want to do that, because I want to make sure I preserve this tradition and show what I'm able to do as what my ancestors were able to do, and it's a very special thing to me. And I can already say I have devoted my life to the bead making ways. For this, I like to point out, this is again sinew, and I like to use this for stringing. Now, sometimes a lot of the old necklaces, they would just use a cotton. They would spin their own cotton or find something that had a cotton in it, and they would respin it, and they would string that with the beads. Now, that's how a lot of our old necklaces start to break and start to, lose its beads and such. But it's because of the cotton string and how sinew or even nylon or whatever, similar material to this is more durable than cotton. And so people ask me every time, what do you, wrap it with, or what do you string it with? And I always say I string it with not cotton, I string it with sinew, and I wrap it with cotton. And so it kind of disguises that sinew look a little bit. Like if you were to do the beads like this, you can obviously see it's sinew. But, if you weren't to do that, you just say, I don't know, it could be cotton, it could be sinew, whatever. But people do buy their beads nowadays. They go to the bead store and they do string their necklaces. And hey, I have nothing against that. That's something that I started off with even when I was first starting jewelry making. Was I went to the bead shops and bought my beads and stringing together my first necklaces and getting used to the design and the stringing of making things until I finally took up the courage and the strength to actually make my own beads and be my own bead store. There's a lot of learning that one can learn from just by making beads. You learn a whole bunch of things, and just the same thing with whatever craft you're doing. You learn a lot of things from that craft. But I have learned a lot of things from this. I learned about patience. I learned about self-respect and reverence. I also learned about just to make sure I'm careful about things too, because when I'm not careful about things, then like when I'm bead making, I could break all my beads. That would just make me feel horrible. But when you actually take the time to do something and do it the right way, you feel really good about it and you feel accomplished. And this is the reason why I'm doing this today, is because it makes me feel good, but it also makes me feel like I'm preserving what is almost lost, to make sure it won't become lost or extinct. And for this, I hope to inspire more of my own people, my Dene people, to take up bead making, and all other people out there, to make sure that they take up the their lost traditions and resurrect them, if you will. It's what defines us as a people, as well as it kind of represents who our ancestors were. And for that, I'm very thankful to have the elders, the medicine people, my friends and family, and anyone else who I've met in my life who has taught me about this lost art. And it holds a special place in my heart. And I hope whoever purchases my work, it feels the same way, that they know that it is authentically made, and it has been put into countless hours for just making such a even a bead. It's very special, and it kind of puts a part of myself in there, and who I was. So yeah, and thank you for watching this.